because we are going to organize a lecture series, that is Chookolingo lecture series 2023 to 24. So from the very beginning, I can request to the head of the department and our honorable speaker, Professor Anantanand Rambachan, to lighten the light and offer flowers to our Pandit Malavya, who is the founder of this university. I can also request to some professors of the department and other department can join there. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I don't let me call them. Did call them? Oh, great. Now I can request to the research scholar of this department, Vikas Pandey, to chant Mangalacharan.
ॐ वेदान्तेषु यमाहुरेकपुरुषं व्याप्य स्थितं रोदसी यस्मिन्नेश्वर इत्यनन्यविषयः शब्दो यथार्थाक्षरः अन्तर्यस्य मुमुक्षुभिर्नियमितः प्राणादिभिर्मृग्यते सस्थाणुः स्थिरभक्तियोगसुलभो निःश्रेयसायास्तु वः निःश्रेयसायास्तु वः बर्हापीडं नटवरवपुः कर्णयोः कर्णिकारम् बिभ्रद्वासः कनककपिशं वैजयन्तीं च मालाम् रन्ध्रान् वेणोरधरसुधयः पूरयन् गोपवृन्दै वृन्दारण्यं स्वपदरमणं प्राविशद्गीतकीर्तिः यद्विश्वविस्मयकरं चरितं महीयः वाचस्पतेरपि गिरां सुतरां दवीयः प्रातः सदा सुमनसामभिवन्द्यनीयः वन्द्यस्य मे मदन मोहन मालवीयः वन्द्यस्य मे मदन मोहन मालवीयः हरिः ओम्।
Now I can request to the head of the department to felicitate our speaker, honorable speaker, Professor Anantanand Rambachan. After Kulgir. So I can request to the scholar of the music department, Anjali and Kajal. Kajal, yes, to chant our Pulkit. May I request you, please.
मधुर मनोहर अतीव सुंदर ये सर्व वेद्या की राजधानी राजधानी मधुर मनोहर अतीव सुंदर ये सर्व वेद्या की राजधानी राजधानी ये तीनों लोगों से न्यारी काशी सुज्ञान धर्मा और सत्यनाशी बसी है गंगा की रम्य तट पर ये सर्व विद्या की राजधानी राजधानी नहीं नहीं है ये ईंट पत्थर है विश्वकर्मा का कार्य सुंदर रचे है विद्या की भव्य मंदिर ये सर्वश्रेष्ठी की राजधानी राजधानी यहाँ की है पवित्र शिक्षा की सत्य बीके हरिश्चंद्र थे यहीं पर ये सत्य शिक्षा की राजधानी राजधानी वह वेद ईश्वर की सत्यवाणी बनी जिन्हें पढ़ के ब्रह्म ज्ञानी थे व्यास जी ने रचे यहीं पर ये ब्रह्म वेद्या की राजधानी राजधानी वो मुक्ति पद को दिलाने वाले सुधर्म पथ पर चलाने वाले यही फले फूले बुद्ध शंकर ये राज ऋषियों की राजधानी राजधानी सुरम्य धाराएं वरुणासी नहाए जिनमें कबीर तुलसी भला हो कविता का क्यों ना कर ये बाग वेद्या की राजधानी राजधानी विविध कला अर्थ शास्त्र गायन गणित खनिज प्रतीचि प्राची का मेल सुंदर ये विश्वविद्या की राजधानी राजधानी ये मालवी देश भक्ति ये उनका ये उनकी शक्ति ये मालवी जी देश भक्ति ये उनका साहस ये उनकी शक्ति प्रकट हुई है नवीन होकर ये कर्म वीरों की राजधानी राजधानी मधुर मनोहर अतीव सुंदर ये सर्व विद्या की राजधानी राजधानी मधुर मनोहर अतीव सुंदर ये सर्व विद्या की राजधानी राजधानी।
धन्यवाद. Now, I can request to the head of the department, Professor Anant Mishra sir, to felicitate our honorable speaker, Anantanand Rambachan sir. धन्यवाद sir. Now I can request to the head of the department to provide a introductory remarks of this lecture series, sir.
Hari Om. Honorable Speaker, Professor Anantanand Rambachan, Convener Dr. Lochan Behera, scholars, colleagues, students and friends. I, on behalf of the Department of Philosophy and Religion, BHU, welcome you all in this Chookolingo lecture series 2023-24. Friends, this is really a great privilege for us that one of the greatest scholars of Advaita Vedanta, Hinduism, and religious studies, Professor Anantanand Rambachan, who is professor at St. Olaf College, US, is here with us. Rambachan is a great Advaitin. He has worked on epistemology of Advaita Vedanta. In his thesis, he has tried to find out or locate that Shruti is the chief source of our knowledge, and in fact the whole of Advaita Vedanta is just a logical analysis of the thoughts contained in Shruti. Anantanandji is a similarly devoted scholar of Hinduism, and I think main contribution of Professor Anantanand Rambachan is that he has worked on religious harmony and religious dialogues, especially the Hindu-Christian dialogues, how in fact we can approach towards a what is known as harmony of all the religions. This has been his main task. So I am really very grateful to Professor Rambachanji. In fact, I have no words to welcome Professor Rambachanji. I am also very grateful to Geeta ji, Mrs. Rambachan, who has accompanied Professor Rambachan sir. I welcome you, madam, in this seminar hall. I also welcome Priest Jan. In fact, he has always been an inspiration for all these programs. I welcome you in this seminar hall. I extend my warm welcome to Professor H.S. Prasad, former head of the department, Delhi University Philosophy Department. I welcome Professor H.S. Prasad. When I told him that Professor Rambachan is going to deliver his lecture on Advaita, what is Advaita, one and the many, he told that he would be surely in the program. So he is present online. In fact, a few months back, he was also very eager to present his lecture on Ekmeva Dutiyam in this seminar hall. Unfortunately, he could not deliver that. I hope that in near future he would deliver his presentation here. I also welcome Professor Uma Chattopadhyay ji, who is again with us online from Calcutta University. Professor Arvind Kumar Rai sir, formerly professor and head of this department. He is also online present. Alok ji, Jitendra Prasad from Hyderabad, and so many scholars are, in fact, they are connected either online or offline. I welcome all of you, Professor Surya Prakash Shukla ji, Professor Devrat Chobe sir, who is here with us, Rajkumar ji, K.K. Misra ji, Professor S.C. Dubey ji, Bagre ji, Rahul Moria, Dr. Niti Singh ji, Dr. Priyanka Misra, Dr. Kalpana ji. I welcome all these faculties, scholars, and students. Welcome you all. Thank you.
धन्यवाद सर. On behalf of the Department of Philosophy and Religion, BHU, I am the convener of this seminar lecture series, Chookolingo lecture series. Rajiba Lochan Behera welcomes you all from online and offline. The very vibrant topic of this lecture series is what is Advaita, the one and the many. That is going to be delivered by a versatile thinker. He is our honorable speaker, the eminent Professor Anantanand Rambachan. Professor Anantanand Rambachan is a Professor Emeritus of Religion, Philosophy and Asian Studies at St. Olaf College, Minnesota, USA from 1995 to 2021. He was also the visiting professor of Forum Humanum in the Academy for the Study of World Religions at the University of Hamburg in Germany from 2023 to 2017. He earned his MA and PhD degree from the University of Leeds and has been deeply involved in the interreligious dialogue, especially Hindu-Christian dialogue, for several decades. He has lectured in many countries and in an active participant in the dialogue program of the World Council of Churches and in consultation of the Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue at the Vatican. Professor Rambachan, at the invitation of the Archbishop of Canterbury, delivered the distinguished Lambeth Lecture at Lambeth Palace, London. His scholarly interest includes the Advaita, non-dual Vedanta traditions, Hindu ethics, liberal theology, comparative theology, and interreligious dialogue. The British Broadcasting Corporation transmitted a series of 25 lectures on Hinduism by Professor Rambachan around the world. Professor Rambachan has been involved in the interreligious relations and dialogue for over 40 years as a Hindu contributor and analyst. He is a co-president of Religions for Peace, the largest global interfaith network, and serves as president of the board. Emeritus International New York and a global organization advocating for the rights of children and mobilizing the resources of religions to overcome violence against children. He is also chair the board of directors of the Minnesota Multi-Faith Network. He is active in the dialogue programs of the World Council of Churches and the Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue at the Vatican. He is the author of many books, but I'm going to take the name of some significant ones, accomplishing the accomplished the Veda is a source of valid knowledge in Sankaraj in 1991. In this book, he has argued that Sankaraj's non-dualistic system of Advaita Vedanta has been organized as one of the greatest philosophical achievements of the Indian tradition. He says that Sankaraj's system is the articulation of the means by which a human understanding of ultimate reality can be attained. Next one, Gita's Mritam, the essential teaching of the Bhagavad Gita, 1993. Here he has discussed about the Gita's teaching about the nature and role of the incarnation. Professor Ramabachan identifies karma, a state of desiring, wanting a life of fundamental problems. Essence of this human dissatisfaction is to be found in the understanding of wants to be the full and complete one, Atman. He says that such knowledge enables one to act in the world from a deep sense of inward peace and fulfillment. The limits of scriptures, Vivekananda's interpretations of the Vedas. In this book, he has argued that the limits of scriptures offers a close examinations of Vivekananda's understanding of the authority of Shruti and its relationship to Anubhav. In addition, his work evaluates the coherence and consistency of Vivekananda's reinterpretations, drawing attention to important problem in his claim for the supremacy of personal experience. His arguments for many path to the same goal, and his attempt to reconcile the insights of Hinduism with the method and findings of science. The Hindu vision. This is a discerning and lucid articulation of Hindu beliefs and practice. Next, the Advaita worldview, God, world, and humanity. In this book, Professor Anantanand Rambachan offers a fresh and detailed perspectives on Advaita Vedanta, Hinduism's most influential and revered religious traditions. The next book, The Hindu Theology of Liberations. This book, engaging and ascending works, provides an introduction to the Hindu traditions and Advaita Vedanta and brings it into discussion with contemporary concerns. Professor Ramabachan argues the harmonics and spirituality of Advaita using textual sources, classical, contemporary, and modern scholarship. And he claimed that there are implications of Advaita for ethical and social challenges. In the next book, Hindu Theology, this book he offers a series of theological explorations theme, not usually addressed in standard treatments of the Hindu traditions. The book examines several key issues in Hindu theology and its engagement with contemporary religious, social, political, and interfaith questions, including the theological methods employed in the study of Hinduism. In the next book, Pathway to Hindu-Christian Dialogue, he argues that Hindu and Christian live side by side in many parts of the Western world, and there are growing numbers of Hindu-Christian marriages and families. Hindu students are attending many colleges with a Christian history and ideals. This book offers dialogues that fosters mutual understanding, respect, and learning in both communities. And Gita Nirdarsana, smiles of the Bhagavad Gita. Professor Ramabachan argues that here the smile refers to the smile of Sri Krishna. That is a beautiful visual dimension to words and invite reflex and explorations. In this text, Professor Rambachan has chosen 12 smiles for reflections. They deal with diverse but into related matters such as the nature of the self, faith, scriptures, self-control, peace, wisdom, and nature of God. Next, wisdom teaching from the Hindu Ramayana. In this book, Professor discusses the core teaching of the text and demonstrates the relevance of this of our contemporary world. Subject is forgiveness, friendship, faithfulness, power, and courage are presented in a manner that will enrich and instruct people of all religions. One will find here some of the finest gems of Hindu wisdom. Next, wisdom teaching from the Hindu wisdom Upanishads. In this book, Professor analyzed 10 famous Upanishads dialogues presenting the story behind each encounter, the significance of the questions and wisdom of the answer. In doing so, he highlights the spiritual wealth and beauty of one of the most ancient religion in our world, and shows how all can benefit from the study of its teaching. Next, Bharata, love and justice in the Ramayana. This book discusses the character of Bharata in the Ramayana. Bharata is offered an opportunity to enjoy the power and wealth which comes from being king of Ajodhya. His heart, however, is filled with a deep sense of righteousness, and he will not accept any gain which comes to him through unjust means. Bharat's justice is matched only by his love for Rama. The author, Professor Ramabachan, shows how Bharat stand as a powerful symbol of inspiration and resistance to the temptation of power. Next one, love and truth in the Ramayana of Tulsidas. This book explores the many expressions of active love and truth in his lives of Rama and Sita in the Ramayana of Tulsidas. Rama's relationship with the outcast Guha, the tribe's omens, Sabari, and Vibhishan, the brother of Ravana, are treated in details. His attitude to truth and to the relationship between morality and power are also considered. Next book, Hanuman, the message of God. This book discusses that how Lord Hanuman is the outstanding example of the spiritual life in action. The circumstances of his encounters with Rama, his recognitions of the divinity of Rama, his response to Rama as God, the Rama's reaction to him, it also analyzed his qualities as a minister of so Sugriva, his relationship with Sita and his encounters with Ravana. Last book is Faith- Faithful Peace. Why the journey to build resistance in multi-religious. This is a brilliant and enlightening piece of work which explores the importance of multi-religious engagement and why this effort to bring people to all faiths and traditions together can and thus creates a more peaceful world. The author argues that how Christians, Hindu, indigenous, Jewish, Muslim, and Sikh theologies, perspectives and insights stand together for peace. And also, the professor Anantanand Rambachan has published numerous chapters and articles in scholarly journals and essays. Sir, We are really grateful to have here. So I can welcome again to present your paper, scholarly paper.
Thank you very much, Professor Behera, for your kind words and for such a detailed journey into my writings. I've never been introduced in such a beautiful way as far as my writings are concerned. So thank you very much. Namaste, everyone. Let me begin by saying how deeply honored I am and how humbled I am to be invited to the Department of Philosophy here by Professor Ananda Mishra to deliver this lecture in the Chookolingo Memorial Lecture Services. I really appreciate this, and I want to thank Professor Mishra for this invitation, and also to thank my dear friend Father Jan for all of his work as a intermediary in making this visit possible. It's a very special joy to be here with all of you and to be in conversation with you. Again, Jan told me just before I started to speak that I should say something about my study of Advaita, and so I thought I would honor his request by just a few brief words. I came to the study of Advaita many decades ago, not as a professor of religion, but I came to the study of Advaita as a seeker, as someone searching for wisdom. I came as what we would say in Sanskrit, I came as a jigyasu, as a seeker of jnanam. And I studied with my teacher for 3 years in Rishikesh. I lived with him in very austere circumstances on the banks of the Ganges. And each day studied the bhashyas of Shankara, the Prasthanatraya, Upanishads, Brahma Sutras, Bhagavad Gita with my teacher. It was only after my 3 years of intense study at Rishikesh that I returned to university with his blessings, because he felt that this traditional way of teaching and studying Advaita needed to be articulated and to be present in the faculties of philosophy and religion at the universities. So, with his blessings, I went back to university in England and I completed my graduate studies there. I wrote my dissertation. My dissertation was based very much on what I had received from him about the nature of the Sruti as Pramana. And this was eventually published in one of the books that Professor Behera mentioned, Accomplishing the Accomplished, the Vedas as a valid source of knowledge in Shankara. I would conclude this brief biographical remarks by saying that I am still a student of the Advaita tradition, but from my teacher, the ideal student of Advaita aspires to be both a Srotriyam and a Brahmanishtam. In other words, the ideal in Advaita was always a combination of deep intellectual study and inquiry, which is the word Srotriya, one who knows this, one who knows the Sruti, one who has studied deeply the authoritative sources of the tradition. But that has to go side by side with an existential commitment to the tradition, which is what the word Brahmanishtam describes. And Advaita, like other Indian traditions, has always flourished when these two were brought together creatively. The gifts of the mind, the intellectual faculties, but also combined with a deep spirituality. Srotriyam Brahma Nishtam. And these ideals have been the guiding lights of my career as a scholar and as a teacher. So I have chosen for my topic this afternoon, as you know, what is Advaita, the one and the many. So let me begin with just some preliminaries. I think most of you are familiar with these. So I'll go through these very, very quickly. Advaita is a tradition that looks to the four Vedas, Rig, Sam, Yajur, Atharva, as sources of valid knowledge. And the key word, of course, there is pramana. And very specifically, Advaita derives its teachings from the last sections of the four Vedas. Therefore, it's Advaita Vedanta, which I'm speaking of the Upanishads. As far as other authoritative sources are concerned, Advaita also looks to Bhagavad Gita and to the Brahma Sutra. These three Upanishad, Bhagavad Gita, and Brahma Sutras are considered to be the pillars, Prasthanatrayi, the three pillars of the Advaita tradition. Now, given the fact that Advaita regards the Vedas as sources of valid knowledge, pramana, I think a brief clarification of what this means is important. Because although Shankara himself, and this comes across so clearly in his commentaries, understands the Vedas to have their origin in Brahman. Brihadaranyaka Upanishad speaks of the Vedas as the breath of the divine, and Shankara recognizes that. Yet it is very important and interesting that Shankara does not center his arguments for the significance or for the authority of the Vedas on the fact of their origin in Brahman. We will not find him making this as a central argument. In other words, to put it simply, he doesn't say that these teachings are true because they originate in Brahman. And his argument is a very refined argument. He says that such arguments, if I were to say that these texts or these teachings are true because they originate in God, then I would be making a hopelessly circular argument. Why? Because it is from the Vedas that I learn about Brahma's omniscience, and the Vedas are then become the authority for that argument. So it's not a convincing argument. So the cornerstone for Shankara's argument, and this has become the argument of the tradition, for why the Sruti is important, why the Sruti is authoritative, is that Sruti satisfies the criteria of valid knowledge. The primary argument is not that it is divine in its origin, but it's an epistemological argument that Sruti satisfies the criteria for valid knowledge, or what is called prama. And there are some points I want to make very quickly here. For Shankara, valid knowledge is centered on the object of knowledge. Is vastu, as he says, is vastu tantram. It is centered on what you want to know, and it is generated by a valid source. Of the Shruti is connected with its nature as a valid source of knowledge, then the natural question is, what is the criteria for valid knowledge? What makes any knowledge valid? And here is where we get into his, the depths of his epistemological thought. So first, I want to mention just two of the criteria that he refers to again and again in his commentaries. So first, a valid source of knowledge must inform us, must have a unique subject matter. If it tells us something that we know from other sources, then it becomes redundant. So it must, the word in English is novelty. It must reveal or teach us something novel. If you say, you have perception as a valid source of knowledge, inference as a valid source of knowledge, etc., then these must reveal things that are unique. I must know through inference something that I can't know through perception, even though they are related. Now, this is a really interesting argument, especially for comparative theology or comparative philosophy, because for Shankara, it is not the business of Shruti, it is not the function of the scripture to reveal matters or to tell us about matters which can be known through other sources of knowledge. So scripture or Shruti has a very limited sphere of authority. So for example, it is not the business of Shruti to tell us about history. History is for the historian. It is not the business of Shruti to tell us what we can know about the world through science. That is the work of the scientist. Because if we look to Shruti to tell us history, then Shruti is redundant. We can know from history why do we need a scripture if we have access to what the scripture gives us through any other source? Why I am saying that this is important, because it is also always, this is why the Hindu tradition historically has not had the contentious relationship with science that other traditions continue to have. I mean, science was not always popular in the history of for example, the Christian tradition. Many scientists were ostracized and some even worse, because their findings were conflicting with traditional religious claims. But this wouldn't happen under Shankara, because Shruti should not contradict. And this is my second point. So first, the Shruti has a very narrow, limited sphere. It should tell us only what we cannot know about reality from other sources of knowledge. And for him, there are two things. It basically centers on the nature of Brahman. Brahman is the subject matter of Shruti. The second criteria, which I want to emphasize, is that a source of valid knowledge must satisfy what in Sanskrit is called abadhitatvam, contradicted. Valid knowledge must be novel, and secondly, it must not be contradicted by what we know of reality from other valid sources. So this criterion, as far as Advaita is concerned, is really the crucial test of the validity of knowledge. Because how do we know what we know is false when it is contradicted? So non-contradictedness is a very universal feature of valid knowledge, and it's very, when you read Shankara's commentaries, you see how he is drawing from this in his refutation of other arguments on the basis of this principle of non-contradictedness. So his famous point on this is in his commentary on Bhagavad Gita, where he says that if 100 Shruti passages tell you fire is cold, you are under no obligation to accept those words. Because you know from other sources of knowledge, pratyaksha, perception, that fire is hot. And Shruti should not contradict what we know about reality from other valid sources of knowledge. So these are the two important criteria that we should keep in mind. Now, the Advaita tradition historically has had two core claims, two interrelated core claims. And for me, these claims are what makes Advaita Advaita, without which the tradition would not be what it is. The first is Sarvam Khalvidam Brahma. Everything is Brahman. This is the famous Chandogya Upanishad text. Sarvam Khalvidam Brahma. And the second is, we have the Mahavakyas, but I am Atma Brahma. That Atman is Brahman. Sarvam Khalvidam Brahma, everything is Brahman, and I am Atma Brahman. Atma is Brahman. So Shankara interprets the Upanishads to teach that the universe originates in Brahman alone. He argues against other cosmologies that propose matter, like insentient matter, Prakriti, for example, as the cause of the universe. And he argues against the universe emerging from atoms or non-existence or a personal being limited by time and space. So for Shankara, Brahman is both ground of all that exists and operative cause. In Sanskrit, nimitta upadana karanam is both the ground of reality as well as the operative cause of everything that exists. So this teaching, Sarvam Khalvidam Brahma, that Brahman is the single ontological reality, the essential truth of all that exists, leads logically to I am Atma Brahman. They're interrelated. Brahman is available now, here, and now in every human being, in every living being, as the self, as the ultimate subject, the non-objectifiable awareness that is the ground of all mental and all cognitive processes, the ground of the I sense, the aham without Brahman. So Shankara's understanding of the human problem, if I put it in that way, follows closely from these two core claims. I am Atma Brahma, Sarvam Khalvidam Brahma. If the human being is not different ontologically from the limitless reality Brahman, and if one does not know this truth, then the human predicament, the human problem, may be properly represented as one of avidya. Because there is no other way that you could be separate from Brahman. We can't be separated from Brahman by space. We can't be separated from Brahman by time. Because the very different definition of Brahman as a reality that transcends space and time, there's only one way in which one can be separated from Brahman. That is what is called avidya, by ignorance. So for him, the central human problem may be described in this language. So the problem is fundamentally, and this is not to minimize what avidya is, but the problem is fundamentally an epistemological one, since it does not involve the creation of anything new, or bringing into existence something that did not exist before, or bridging, as I said, any spatial or time distance. So for Shankara, moksha is identical with the removal of ignorance, because the self is always there. It is ever present, ever available. It is avidya nivriti, the removal of ignorance. As he puts it in his Brihadaranyaka Bhasha, the cessation of ignorance alone is commonly called moksha. And this is also leads to, I quickly mention, the ideal of Jivan Mukti or Jivan Mukta, because liberation is possible here and now. It is not a product of anything. That's why he prefers to put it negative, is removal of ignorance rather than the creation of liberation. Liberation always exists because it's synonymous with the nature of every human being. So with that as background, I ask the question then, what is Advaita? And I will first of all say what it is not. It's also typical Advaita teaching strategy before trying to say what it is. So first the neti. what is not Advaita? Clearly, it is not dualism. Advaita is not dualism. Why? It is an unambiguous rejection of a dualistic worldview. And what is a dualistic worldview? I should define is a worldview, especially if we're speaking of the theologies. Those views that propose the universe to exist as a separate and parallel ontological reality from the one. The many, exists as a parallel ontological reality from the one. That would be a sort of a classic definition of dualism. You have two separate realities existing parallel to each other, each with its own distinct ontological nature. Dualism. So that is clearly for Shankara not consistent at all with his understanding and the teachings of the Upanishads, because he takes his, as a starting point, those Upanishad passages that affirm the existence of Brahman before everything else. So in other words, if you look at all of those passages, for example, the Chandogya, beautiful Chandogya, poetic, Sadeva Saumya Idamagra Asit Ekameva Advitiyam Brahma. Before anything else came to being, there was one alone. And the text repeats, Ekam Eva Advitiyam Brahma. So if you miss the non-duality of it, he repeats the word too. So if there is no dualism prior to the existence of the many, and if dualism prior to the existence of the many would be a problem, how could you then posit dualism after the existence of the many? The concern, Jan is here, so I make this comparative reference. The concern to reject any dualism prior, if you even look at theistic traditions, we see there also the concern to deny any kind of dualism prior to creation. This is why, in the Christian tradition, by and large, you have the well-known teaching, creatio ex nihilo, creation out of nothing, because you can't posit anything existing there besides the divine. If you posit anything existing beside the divine, immediately it becomes a limitation on the divine. You're talking about another ontological reality. But then the Christian tradition goes in a different direction and speaks of creatio ex nihilo, creation out of nothing, whereas the Upanishads, creation out of Brahman. Now, interesting whether there are different ways of saying the same thing. It's an important question. The Christian tradition could have gone and spoken of creatio ex Deo, creation out of God, but chose to speak of. And I will say probably why it was concerned not to put it in that in that way because of the fear of pantheism. I'll come back to that question. So there was no ontological dualism before, and as we'll see, there's no ontological dualism after. So Advaita is clear rejection of dualism, especially ontological dualism. So here I come to the point that I wanted to also connect. So Advaita is not dualism. Advaita is not pantheism. Now, if you looked at a lot of Advaita, especially Western commentaries on the Advaita tradition, the tradition is often described as a version of pantheism. So pantheism will mean the English word pantheism, that God is the world. God is the world. So I'm saying Advaita is not pantheism. Why am I saying that? Pantheism is a very simplistic equation of the one with the many, or limiting the reality of the one to the many. The one has become the many. The one has actually, it's a form of, the one has actually transformed itself into and become the many. And therefore, in one sense, once you have the many, the one is no longer the one, because it has become the many. But for Advaita, why I'm saying it is not pantheism and it's wrong to describe it as pantheism, there is no Upanishadic passage, and Shankara, there is no Bhashya in Shankara you could cite to say that the Upanishads or Shankara is making an argument for the real transformation of Brahman into the world. It is true that Brahman is both intelligent cause, and I don't say material cause, I say material ground, right? But there is no argument that Brahman somehow becomes transformed into, that the one somehow is transformed into the many by undergoing some kind of change to become the many, which would be pantheism. Because if that happened, if the one literally became the many and is no longer that original one, it presents a lot of problems for Shankara. There's no liberation. There's no moksha, because Brahman was, then Brahman became the world, and Brahman is no longer available as Brahman. So Shankara does not simplistically equate the world with Brahman. And yes, I can give many arguments to show why this is so. And we have to correct I think we have to correct a whole tradition of scholarship about Advaita that speaks of it as pantheism. But let me just give you a flavor of some of Shankara's arguments, why I'm making this point. In Brahma Sutra, he argues that Brahman is described as cause, karanam, and the world as effect, karya, because this implies some difference. If, he says, there are no differences, then you cannot speak of one as cause and the other as effect. But the fact, as between cause and effect, Shankara writes, some distinction has got to be admitted as existing, as in the case of clay and a pot, for unless some peculiarity exists, it is not possible to distinguish them as cause and effect. In addition to that, for Shankara, the relationship between Brahman and the world is asymmetrical. Asymmetrical. What I mean, the world as an effect of Brahman shares in the nature of Brahman, but the nature of the world, the features of the world, do not constitute the essential nature of Brahman. In other words, the effect has the nature of the cause, but the cause doesn't necessarily have the nature of the effect. That's what we call an asymmetrical relationship. The one is the ground and the source of the many it is not reducible to the many. So for Shankara, classical pantheistic theology or philosophy has no sense of the transcendence of the one, because it fully equates Brahman with the world. There's no sense of Brahman transcending the world. But when we look both at the Upanishads and at Shankara, we see a clear emphasis on Brahman's transcendence. And again, some examples. If we look linguistically to the language argument, the Upanishads and Shankara they are always arguing about the limits of language in relation to Brahman. Taittiriya Upanishads, very famous line, Yato vacho nivartante aprapya manasasaha. That from which all words return, having failed to reach. It's a clear argument for transcendence, that Brahman is more than anything we can say about the world. Aprapya manasasaha. And then we have all of the negative definitions, whether it's Mundaka Upanishad, Katha Upanishad, that which is invisible, ungraspable, without lineage, without color, without eyes, without ears, denying that anything in the world is like Brahman, is also an argument for Brahman's transcendence. So the language argument and all of these verses point to Brahman's transcendence and distinguish it from familiar objects in the world. That's what Kena Upanishad is all about. Yat chakshushana pashyati, that which the eyes cannot see. If Brahman was the world itself, we couldn't make an argument like that in Kena Upanishad. That which the eyes cannot see, but because of which the eyes see. That whole sequence of beautiful poetic verses in Kena Upanishad. That which the ear cannot hear, but because of which the ear hears. That which the mind cannot think of, but because of which the mind thinks. All of those verses are pointing to a reality that cannot be equated narrowly or fully with the world. My third point, perhaps again interesting, because I have found many places where Advaita is not only described as pantheism, but as panentheism. And I'm saying Advaita is not panentheism. So there's an important difference between pantheism and panentheism. The difference is En. The difference is the En. So basically, pantheism, pan is the word, world is in God. World is in God. Pantheism, world is God. Panentheism, world is in God. So panentheism seeks to make a subtle distinction from pantheism. But I'm saying that's not Advaita also. Why am I saying that? So I think why Advaita could be confused with panentheism is because that there are many texts in the Upanishads that seem to suggest panentheism and that speak of the world existing in Brahman. Ishavasyam idam sarvam yat kincha jagatyam jagat. That we should see everything wrapped in this one. And if you move from Upanishads to Bhagavad Gita, which is of course one of the Prasthana Trayi books, you would find even more panentheistic verses. Mai sarvamidam protam sutre manigana iva. That everything exists in me like jewels on a string. Sri Krishna comparing himself there to the string, in the necklace which holds all the jewels together. Yatha kashastito nityam vayu sarvatra go mahan. As everything exists in space, so everything exists in me. So there's a lot of verses that resonate with pantheism as a philosophy, as a theology. But I'm saying that Advaita is also not panentheism. Why am I saying that? I'm saying so because Panentheism emphasizes the inseparability of the many from the one. They exist. If you have to ask where does the world exist, you would say it exists in Brahman as an answer. But panentheism is still compatible with dualism. We could make the argument that the world exists in God, but the world is a separate ontological reality within the one. So it is still compatible with, fundamentally, it is still compatible with dualism. And I've said before, Advaita rejects plural ontological realities or dual ontological realities. The fact that the many exist in the one is not incompatible with Advaita, but the problem is that panentheism is still compatible with dualism. And I think Advaita makes a claim that goes beyond panentheism. What Advaita adds to panentheism is the truth of a single, undivided, ontological reality that constitutes the nature of everything. If you take a glass of water and I put a stone in the water, I will say, yes, where does the stone exist? It's in the water. But at the same time, there's a dualism there. The stone is not constituted by the very nature of the water. So in that sense, I'm problematizing panentheism. But here is another, perhaps more interesting argument that I'm going to make. Not dualism, not pantheism, not panentheism. And you're going to ask, when is he going to say what Advaita is? But before I do that, not illusionism. Not illusionism. And I said, again, another problematic word for me that has been used historically to speak about Advaita is monism. And I would say not monism. Not illusionism, not monism as well. Why am I saying that? I'm saying so because many interpreters of Advaita, in order to preserve, because they recognize the importance to Advaita of preserving the ontological singularity of the one, and many interpreters, in order to affirm the ontological singularity of Brahman, liken the many to a sense illusion that we conjure and experience because of our ignorance. So to preserve the infinite nature of the one, the singular infinity of the one, the many is explained away as illusion. Because the only way if you have many, if you see many and you are saying there is only one that exists, right? Listen, if we experience many and we are saying, but there is really only one, then it's easy to slip and say, well, then it means the many don't exist. That the many are illusory. And that is the illusion argument. See? So there's a whole history of reading Advaita as suggesting the illusory nature of the many. And I want to argue and push back against that, which might surprise you because it's a very well-known argument and illustrated with some very powerful and well-entrenched metaphors, the rope snake, the popular Raju Sarpa example, where's the rope and the snake is completely your projection. And some argue, well, that's used as a metaphor to say that the world is also like that. It's a projection, a subjective projection. So the problem here is that many think that the understanding that the the understanding of the many as illusion follows logically from the claim about the infinity of the one. Then you say that the many cannot really exist, and if the many exist, then the one is compromised. That's the problem there with that argument. And although illusionism is a popular interpretation of the meaning of Advaita today by contemporary Advaita interpreters, on the whole, I will say, on the whole, maybe here and there you might find a passage, but I want to make us say, on the whole, it is not an argument that is supported by Shankara. Shankara, let me give you some reasons why I'm saying that. Again, Brahma Sutra, Asha. Shankara argues for the objective nature of the world, and he challenges, this is one of his arguments against a version of Buddhism. He challenges the argument that what appears to be outside of the mind is an illusion, and says, I'm quoting an English translation here, for external things are perceived as a matter of fact. It is wrong to say that external things do not exist merely on the ground that cognition is seen to have the likeness of an object, because the very likeness of an object is not possible unless the object be there, and also because the object is cognized outside. So for Shankara then, the reality of the many is established through valid sources of knowledge, perception, pratyaksha. He uses pratyaksha to argue for the objective reality of the world. So illusionism relies on an interpretation of Advaita that equates our experiences of the world in the waking state with the experiences in the dream state. And Shankara is arguing against that. Again, in the same section in Brahma Sutra, he says that the objects that we experience in dream are negated when we wake up. And that's true. That's how we negate our dreams, because as long as we keep on dreaming it's real. We know the dream to be false only when we are in the Jagrat avastha. But he says objects seen in the waking state are not sublated, like a dream is. They are not dismissed as the objects seen in a dream. Dreams are a phenomena of memory, whereas objects in the waking state are experienced through valid forms of knowledge, such as perception. They can't be made to disappear by any human agency. So he even denies, in the same Brahma Sutra Bhashya, that the world of objects disappears with the attainment of liberation, and argues that the world exists. This is a very important argument, that the world exists both for the liberated and the unliberated. Both for the liberated and the unliberated, for Shankara, the world exists, but there's a difference. And what is this difference? He says that the unliberated attributes an independent, dualistic reality to the world, while the liberated sees the world as owing its existence and its reality to the one. But both see the world. But the liberated sees something more, sees the one. The unliberated sees only the many. The liberated sees the many as owing its existence and deriving its nature from the one. I can just, again, it's not only in Brahma Sutra. There's an important section in Brihadaranyaka Bhashya also, where he says that the world is indeed a fact for those who do not believe in things as different from Brahman, as well as those who do believe. But the believers of the highest truth, while discussing in accordance with the Srutis the actual existence or non-existence of things apart from Brahman, conclude that Brahman alone is one without a second, beyond all finite relations. So liberation from Shankara, for Shankara, is not cessation of the world or cessation from seeing the world, but a new way. a new way of being in the world, a new way of seeing the same reality. And I know some of you have worked here. I just make this point quickly because it will take some time to argue. But the argument for illusionism is also associated with interpretations that attempt to disconnect the world from Brahman by attributing it to sources other than Brahman, like an insentient source, Prakriti, or sometimes Maya. You know, you find that argument very present, that the world is Maya Kalpita. Maya Kalpita is not Shankara's argument. It may be a post-Shankara argument. Again, let's go back to Brahma Sutra. Look at the sequence of those sutras. Athato Brahma Jigyasa, Shastra Yonitvat. What is the third one? Huh? Tattvasman is what? Janmadhyasya Yatha. That Brahman is the source of the world. The world has its origin in Brahman. Pages and pages of Bhashya arguing against any source other than Brahman. Tearing to shreds the Sankhya argument about Prakriti and affirming that only a being endowed with wisdom and infinite intelligence can be the source of the one. No argument there that the world has its origin in anything other than Brahman. No argument for Maya as a source of the world. So it is likely, I put it as a hypothesis that it is a high likelihood that the view of Maya as the cause of the world is a post-Shankara development. And as someone also who I have a very deep interest in the study of Vishishta Advaita and the Ramanuja Shankara dialogue, I feel very strongly, and I need to work on it more, that a lot of the arguments and a lot of the difficulties and good questions that Ramanuja is asking of the Advaita tradition are questions that come from the post-Shankara articulation of Advaita and not Shankara. Even the significance of Ishvara. To just give you an example, the use of the word impersonal to describe Brahman is impersonal. When you argue, Nirguna means impersonal. Nirguna doesn't mean impersonal. All these are problematic translations of a beautiful word like Nirguna, which makes a more profound point about the relationship between substance and attribute and about the undivided nature of the one. So when we look at some of the arguments that are made against Advaita, we have to ask ourselves, are these Shankara arguments or post-Shankara arguments? So I think a big task of Advaita scholarship before us all who are Advaitins is trying to retrieve Shankara, is the retrieving of Shankara. And that can only be done by careful study of his bhashyas. So I hope I'm not keeping it too long, but I'm coming towards the last part of my presentation. So if Advaita is not all of these things, what is it? How can we describe it? Well, interestingly, it's a tradition about which one has to be careful in making any positive statements. After all, it is Advaita. It's not two. It doesn't say one. It's not ekam, but it's not two. And not two is a really interesting and relationship. So Shankara, this tradition designates itself as not two. It chooses to describe the relationship between Brahman and the world as not two, rather than as one. It doesn't say it's one, it doesn't say it's two. It's not two. So there's a space there. There's a space between saying something is one or two and saying it's not two. So to help answer this question, if the meaning of Advaita is not properly described by pantheism, panentheism, illusionism, monism, how we might describe it. So I just want to very briefly take you to one of my favorite Upanishad texts. I'm sure you all know it well. The sixth chapter of Chandogya Upanishad, where there is that beautiful dialogue between Ishvetaketu and his father, Aruni. And Ishvetaketu is like all of you. It's a young graduate who's come back home, and his father thinks he's come back arrogant, and so he wanted to punch the and the balloon of his ego, and he asks him, did you ask for that great wisdom? So when he was about 24 years old when he came back. His father said, "Did you ask for that teaching by which what is never heard becomes heard, what is never thought of becomes thought of, that which is never known becomes known? Did you ask your teachers about Brahman?" And he said, "No, but he blamed the teachers, They never taught me about it, and they obviously didn't know about it themselves." So now, in response to, "Why don't you teach me?" he said to his father, "Why don't you teach me?" And so in response to his son's request for teaching, he gives these amazing analogies in Chandogya Upanishad that we read quickly, but we need to pause and to ponder. You know them very well. By knowing a single lump of clay, all objects made of clay are known. Changes are words and name only. Clay is the reality. Yatha somyaikana mritpindena sarvam mrinmayam vigyatam vikaro namadhyayam mrityam eva satyam. And then he goes on, and the same analogy, by knowing one lump of gold, all objects made of gold are known. Changes are in words only, in name only. Gold is the reality. So there were three analogies that Aruni gives in Chandogya Upanishad to describe the meaning of Advaita. I regard these as core texts for saying what not to mean. Here we can find some light, some way forward, because he is describing a relationship that is exceptional. And the term that he uses here is vikara. Vikara. Vikaro namadhyayam. Vikara. So if you think of the example of gold and gold ornaments, clay and clay pots, and then he uses iron and things made out of iron, something new came into being. When your ornaments that are made out of gold, something has emerged. We're not trying to describe it yet, but just admitting the fact of something that has emerged. And I mean, there's no description here of the clay products or the ornaments as illusory. They're not described in these analogies as illusory. So what these analogies want to emphasize is that the many emerge from the one without subtracting or adding to the ontological fullness of the one. That is what the analogy is. Not to tell us that the many don't exist, right? But to speak of the emergence of the many from the one in a unique cause-effect relationship, where the emergence of the many does not add anything to the ontological fullness of the one. In other words, as actually, it's a great Christian teacher in the past put it in this way. He said that with creation came many beings. But this is the claim. But not more being. Many beings, but not more being. This is all I'm saying is, it's just an explication of Purnamada, Purnamidam, Purnat, Purnamudachyate, Purnasya, Purnameva Vasishyate. A unique relationship where many come from one without adding or subtracting from the one. But that doesn't require us saying that the many are non-existent or that the many are illusory. That is something that we have to ponder. Now, so what about those words in these three examples? Vikaro namadhyayam. What about the description of the changes as changes in name only? Doesn't that point to, can we not interpret that in some ways as pointing to the illusory nature of the many? I don't think so, because in fact, the purpose of describing the changes as changes in name only is for maintaining the fullness of the one. Because the many don't depend on the word. They don't exist because of nama. They exist because of the one. They are dependent on Brahman and not on the distinctiveness of name. Nothing exists merely because it has a name. Everything exists because it is rooted fundamentally in being. So the relationship between clay and clay pots, between gold and gold ornaments, between iron and iron products, can be properly described as not two. That's a classic description of a not two relationship. To speak of the relationship as one denies the many, right? And to speak of the relationship of as two denies the dependence of the many on the one, and the fact that you have no many without the one. So you have to find a new way of describing that relationship. And of course, this tradition has gone for not two. What is the relationship between Brahman and the world? Not two. If you say one, you deny the significance of the many. And if you say two, you deny the significance of the one. Some relationships can only be described as not two. Wave and water is another example, another analogy like that. So I'm going to skip. Why does all of this matter? You will ask, why is Professor Rambachan presenting this to us? What difference does it make? What is he saying about Advaita? Why is this important? Why is this exegesis important? It's a very good question. Basically, I am offering this reading of the Advaita tradition, this exegesis of the tradition, to say that the many matter, that the world matters. And life in the world matters also. And why am I saying that? Contrary to illusionistic interpretations of Advaita, and especially to those that speak of the world as a subjective projection of the human mind, especially those that sort of trace the origin of the world to ignorance. When I'm saying that for Shankara, the world is not avidya kalpita. The world is Brahman. If you had to say anything, the world comes from Brahman. And again, go back to the Upanishads. And Shankara, following the Upanishads, emphasize this fact. Again, Taittiriya Upanishad, so kamayata, bahusyam prajayeti, satapotapyata, satapastaptva, idagum sarvam asrijata, yadidam kincha, tatsvishva. in this passage and so many others, we have a description of intentionality. The intentionality of the one in generating the many. So, satapotapyata, satapastaptva, tapas. The one is described as engaging in an act of tapas. Tapas describes intensive creative effort. That which makes you sweat. And use a different heat generating. Tapas is heat generating. I want to make the point that clearly, if you follow the Upanishads, the many is an outcome of the intentionality of the one. And the Upanishads go on to mention and gives importance to the many by naming them. So the Mundaka Upanishad is a good example. It doesn't simply say that the many have come out of the one, but goes on to list the many. And what has come? Breath has come, mind has come, space has come, air has come, fire has come, earth has come, divine beings, human beings, animals, birds, rice, barley, oceans, mountains. And the verse ends, and corn. And corn. And here for me, that listing individually of all that has come from the one is an affirmation of the value of the many. The value of the many. That everything that has come is unique, has a unique value, and is important not only to the one, but has an important place in the universe of interrelated beings. So unlike something that comes out of ignorance and something that is illusory, intentionality suggests value and worth. When we engage in producing things intentionally, we do so because we value what we produce, what we make. When the Upanishads describe the many as coming out of the intentionality of the one, then it is not wrong to read significance, value, and meaning there. So to conclude, and then maybe I have a chance to make some of the points that I'm not going to make in my lecture, but I think I give you a good sense of the direction in which I'm going. In other words, I'm making a case for a world-affirming interpretation of Advaita, where the many have value, significance, and meaning, and every unique one has a very special place in the order of the universe. Liberation, as I said, for Advaita is the overcoming of ignorance. It is not freedom from the world. Sometimes when we describe, even as Advaitins, the world as samsara, samsara is a word that has negative resonances. Samsara is something from which you want to be free. And when we equate the world as samsara, then immediately we think of liberation as freedom from the world. And that's not the Advaita perspective. Just as Shankara says that the world exists both for the liberated and the unliberated, but there's a difference in how the liberated sees the world, and we should add, and how the liberated acts in the world. Similarly, samsara is not the world, but a way of seeing the world. We may equate samsara with seeing the world through the lens of ignorance, even as moksha is seeing the world through the lens of knowledge or jnanam. So the world does not disappear, but is seen as a new relationship. And now, what our challenge is as Advaitins, as scholars, as practitioners of Advaitin, is to ask ourselves, what is the new way of being in the world? What are the ethics of that new way of being in the world? And I would argue that the ethics at heart, the ethics of that new way of being in the world is an ethics of compassion, an ethics of working together to overcome suffering, an ethics of identifying with others in suffering and in joy. Because Advaita offers a place of meaning for a deep identity with each other. The identity which enables us to suffer when another person suffers and to rejoice in the joy of another. That goes to the very heart of what Advaita is. So it provides for me, it provides a ground for ethical transformation, a new way of being in the world. An extension of our circle of identity that is inclusive, that the pain of every being becomes our pain. The joy of every being becomes our joy. But that requires that we value life in this world and we value each other. And I think that the interpretation of Advaita that I am offering is an interpretation that enables us to grow into this new way of being in this world itself. So I'll stop there. I've kept you listening to me very long. But I hope that I give you a good, overview of the kinds of interpretation that I'm rejecting and the direction in which I am moving with my work. I didn't have a copy of this here, but if you want to read the work in which I share in great detail my attempt to reconstruct Advaita along these lines is called A Hindu Theology of Liberation. Not two is not one. Hindu Theology of Liberation. And there you would find I engage with patriarchy, I engage with anthropocentrism, and I have about 5 chapters dealing with significant problems in the world that could be addressed from the place of an Advaita place of meaning. So I am open, Professor, to any thoughts, any questions that this wonderful audience might have for me.
I may ask a question, rather I.
Thank you. Thank you.
Many thank you, sir. Really, we found it's a thought-provoking and outstanding observation of the concept. And now the topic is open for discussion. Yes, sir. Yes, you can.
May I ask? Okay. Thank you for such a lucid lecture, sir. I immensely benefited from your lecture, but I have some reservations about the last portion of your lecture where you try to derive a kind of ethics, ethics of identifying oneself with the other. But I find that when I read many of the commentaries of Shankara, Vivek Chudamani, Brahma Sutra Bhangsh, particularly Apshudra Adhikaranam, where he justifies caste system and exclusion of Shudras. So how can you, so this is a Buddhistic intrusion, you are introducing Buddhist ethics of compassion, for which in the framework of Shankara, there is no place for it. Secondly, in order for morality to be possible, the other must be real entity, permanent entity. And in Shankara's metaphysics, the other is true at the empirical level only. When you transcend the empirical level, at transcendental level, there is only one single reality. Then how do you adjust? How do you provide a way out of this? Like, because there must be one other, real other, not imaginary other. This is my question. Thank you.
So thank you very much for your question. It's really a very important question that you have raised. So let me say two things. That's an extensive question. So I describe myself as a practitioner of Advaita, and I look to Shankara as the foremost historical systematizer of that tradition. Having said that, I do not approach Shankara uncritically. I do not approach him uncritically. I recognize also that, like every human being, Shankara was also a person of his time. And I give this, I would say, in two ways. I am, as you can see very clearly, and my wife is here, I am not a sannyasin. I am a grihastha. Now, but I have read the Sannyasa Upanishads, and I have studied closely what sannyasa meant in the time of Shankara. And sannyasa in the time of Shankara was a really radical commitment. It was radical in the sense that entering into the stage of sannyasa was one had to significantly cut all of one's ties with one's family, with one's community, and even with ritualistic religious practices. Turned away completely from all social, familial, community obligations, performed one's own death ceremony, made the offerings that would traditionally be made by one's family. So in a sense, one was symbolically declaring oneself to be dead to the world. Shankara was a great, I mean, what a mind. If we accept the traditional biographies that gave him such a short life of 32 years, what accomplishments. At the same time, I think, and I invite all of you to do this work. Shankara reads the Upanishads through the lens of sannyasa. I give you one example. Ishavasya Upanishad. Ishavasya midam sarvam yat kincha jagatyam jagat. See the world enveloped in the divine, wrapped in the divine. Give up and enjoy. Tena tyaktena bunjita. Magrida kasya sviddhanam. Do not covet anyone's wealth. Shankara reads that as a call to sannyasa. I read that as a call to a particular way of being in this world. So how, in other words, how our identities shape the way in which we read our text. Now I always pause now as I'm reading Upanishads and reading Shankara Bhashya to say, what are the other possibilities of meaning in this verse if I'm not reading it as a sannyasi? What would I see in this verse that calls me to a way of being in this world? And I think that's so who we are, what our identity is, informs the way that we read a text. The second point that you raise, which is the question of Shankara and caste. And I've written on that in my book on the Advaita worldview. I think in Shankara's time, and this is not an excuse that I am making for Shankara, that the Varna ashrama system was such a well-entrenched social system. Shankara did not question the fundamental social system of his time. He took it for granted. It was part of his reality. It was part of reality. He didn't have any distance. He didn't have the distance to argue against it or to challenge it, even though, you had the ideal of moksha, which was to be liberated, to know oneself as Brahman, to transcend caste. But yet in his commentaries, you can see he is still, as you said, making an argument for the hierarchical social system. We don't learn from people who are perfect. We should study everyone critically. And our teachers don't have to be perfect. We can learn from them, even as we recognize them as belonging to their particular periods, and we see their limitations only because we are all mixtures. I give you, because I'm here in Varanasi, and I recently wrote a long essay on that, on Tulsidas. As a poet, as a bhakti poet, Tulsidas, when you read the Ramcharitmanas, Tulsidas spoke so eloquently about divine love, about the boundless nature of divine love, exquisite in his poetry. Rama hi keval prema pyara. That Ram is won by love alone. And yet, again, we see in him also the impact of social reality. Yet, the love of God had its boundaries. And Tulsidas did not also contest or challenge the fundamental social structure of his times. He operated within that social structure, took it for granted. We can learn from him, but we should not do so uncritically. So that would be I acknowledge that would be but the second part of your question, which has to do with the ethics. And we will have to do a lot of work and discussion on it. If I turn, for example, to that famous conversation in Behera Upanishad, here is a teacher speaking to his students after they have all studied with him, and we assume that they all studied Vedas because that's what they went to study for. And at the end of that period of study, as they're about to leave his home, they all go to him. And they basically said, Guruji, give us your final teaching. What is your final teaching? And he doesn't speak high theology or philosophy to them. He gives them the word "the." And he says, my teaching is "the." And they each go back. He challenges them to reflect. And each come back to him and say, what is the Dhamma? Control yourselves. Dana, be generous in all your relationships. Daya, be compassionate to everyone. He gives them not a teaching meant for someone who's turning away from the world, but who's going to be engaged in the world. And your three pillars, your three lights should be self-control, generosity, and compassion. As I said, and I'll leave that question there, sir, because I just want to say that I am arguing that liberation is a new way of being in the world, not a turning away from the world. Surely I will not compromise on the ontological singularity of Advaita. But within that ontological singularity, there is a great place for ethics. A great place for ethics. In one of my recent chapters, I use a different example. I use the example of Michelangelo, the great artist. And we go to the museums in Italy to see the great works of Michelangelo. Now, if I went and I looked at all of those works and I said, oh, this is nothing because it's all marble. Okay, they're all, whatever it is, whatever exquisite work he's made, it's really only marble. No. I can see how from this one marble, Michelangelo has forged and shaped these exquisite forms. Each one has a special value, even though it has come from the same source. So having a common origin doesn't mean that I don't see the many, I don't value the many, and that I don't act with love for the many. It is true, Advaita ethics requires the seeing of the other. But my argument is that Advaita does not mean that one does not see the many. It transforms the relationship with the many. It is not blindness to the existence of diversity. It's a new way of responding to diversity. I think it is a vision that our world needs. Critically needs.
Thank you. Many thank you, sir. Now we have respected audience. H.S.
May I-
Prasad, sir.
may I-
Yes, so, yes, sir. Continue.
Professor Saab, I have enjoyed your lecture and I appreciate your scholarship. Can you please hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Hello?
Yes, we are audible.
Okay. Let me have 2 or 3 comments, rather comments, not very, you can say, sharp question. Your title is that the one and the many. But this you can order can be changed. The many, which is problematic, and then the one, which is the solution. This is the order. And what I want to say, that first of all, the phenomena are given, and then from there we start and we come down to ultimate reality. And again, we come back to the phenomenal world. This is our journey. The second point is that, which I have, I think I have not understood in my study, and that's a different thing, is that that was not in your lecture. So, but even then, I think that you are a great scholar and you can think about this one. That the fact is that I am an individual. My constitution is that, and I am an individual. And my constitution is that within myself, and technically we say that embodied self. So embodied self is there very much in me. Now the question here is that within myself, there is a Sakshi, and the presence of the Sakshi and the role of the Sakshi. On the one side, on the other side is Antahkaran. Now, if you, if you kindly solve my problem, that what happens between the two? And what is the active, if there is any active, you can say the active role And on the other side, Antakarana also has the role, wavering, you can say, activities. The last one is that, last but another one, that Shankaracharya has a methodology which is known to everybody, and that is called Adhyas, Arop, and Apavad. So what is he doing actually? That he is creating a conceptual framework, and within that framework, he is presenting a philosophical position. And the last one, a small comments by Shankaracharya against you can say that Madhyamika or Nagarjuna. And at one place it is written Nadra Kriyate. Nadra Kriyate शून्यवादी पक्षस्तु सर्व प्रमाण विप्रति सिद्ध इति तद निराकरणाय नादरा क्रियते. What does it mean? That is it? I mean, I mean, his commentaries, etc. I mean, anybody who reads finds that thoroughly, if not everything, but at least thoroughly, you can say terminology or methodology and what not, he has borrowed from that. Even in that case, he does not criticize Nagarjuna. I mean, this way he is running away. So these are the 4 points. I stop here. Lots of things are there, which for me, I'm not an expert of, you can say, Vedant or Advaita Vedant, but I request you that in short, please give me some lights. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Professor Prasad. You are yourself a very eminent scholar and teacher at Delhi University, and you've raised, 4 important questions about Advaita and Shankara. And I agree very much. I chose the title "The One and the Many," but easily, as you quite rightly said, and I agree, I could have also used reversed it and moved from the many to the one, and then from the one back to the many. So the starting point could have been either the one or the many, but I think essentially one would end up in the same place. And then the second point, which is relationship between Sakshi and embodied self. What happens between the two? How do they relate, or how do they interrelate? And as you know, in Advaita, there have been many different analogies or different metaphors to explain the relationship between Sakshi, which is the word that is used for Brahman as the witness, the illumining consciousness that witnesses and objectifies everything. The Sakshi is the reality because of which I know that I am, and I am aware of my body and my thoughts and my senses, the one that objectifies everything. But you are asking, how does Sakshi relate? How does the subject relate to, if I understand you correctly, how does the subject relate to all of the objects? Especially
Antakaran, please.
Antakarna, is that?
Sakshi and Antakaran relationship and their role.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, sir.
So Sakshi is always even Antakarana in Advaita. And here is something that is very fundamental. Of course, Sakshi is the light of everything. There's no thinking process. There's no emotive life without the light of Sakshi, without the light of consciousness. So Sakshi is that which enables Antakarana to function, enables all cognitive processes, which is itself, I mean, you didn't go in that way, but that has become a very important concern of modern neuroscience and the study of consciousness. Those who are really probing what is consciousness and trying to understand consciousness, I think the kind of question that you raise has a lot, is well connected with that, because you have the more reductionist theories. If we will use the language that you use, you have those in the field of neuroscience who sort of want to suggest that consciousness is generated by the antakarana, that the consciousness is a product of antakarana functionality, whereas you have those Upanishadic position, and now you have some neuroscience moving in that direction who want to suggest consciousness is primary. It is not a byproduct. It is not an outcome of neurological functioning, but it enables all neurological processes to make. And this is the kind of question that Advaita has been wrestling with, as you know, and use a number of analogies to try to describe. Adhyaropa apavada, of course, very important that you mentioned, Professor, fundamental to Shankara's method. And I think some people would say that's the primary prakriya of Shankara. Again, a rich field for discussion. And finally, there's students here who are studying Buddhism and Shankara, and you raised the question of Shankara's relationship with Nagarjuna and others. And I want to, just basically to say, I think it's valid to Shankara debated with certain schools of Buddhism, and it's natural. Sometimes when we are in debates with others, we're also learning from them, even as we seek to, and being influenced by them as we seek to contest their arguments. So you're familiar with the well-known accusation against Shankara, Prachinna Baudha, that Shankara was hidden Buddhist, because in some ways, some of his thoughts came very close. But I think that there would be significant areas where we can differentiate also, where the lines between Shankara and the Buddhists will not converge. So thank you for all the rich questions that you asked.
Thank you.
We can spend a semester on your 4 questions.
But Shankar is very, very, very involved with Vijnanavad. So that also should be taken into consideration, but not now, please. It's a sufficient that you have tried to clarify my doubt. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much for joining us. You have honored us by your presence.
Yes, thank you so much, S.S. Prasad sir, for asking questions and replying by Rambachan sir. And now we can have another questions from online side. Respected audience, Anantanand sir, could you please raise your question now? No need. Yes. Sir, Anantanand sir.
Okay. Thank you so much. I am very, very much thankful for this scholarly discussion and presentation. My question is a very simple one. It may be out of the framework, but once we say that Shruti is to be consulted when other sources of knowledge are exhausted, then if a physicist comes out with the theory of the origin of universe more plausible, more verifiable, then where is the need for searching for the origin of universe in any other Shruti text? This is my question.
Thank you very much for that question. First of all, I don't think, and I believe you will agree with me, I don't think that science has answered all the questions about our universe. Science continues to be a search for answers. And what basically, as I said, the core claim of Advaita is that the many has its origin in a singular, indivisible, undivided truth. No claim of science has contradicted that truth. That the many emerge from one undivided reality. That's the core Advaita claim. And I think Advaita is a courageous tradition. If we have insights from other valid sources of knowledge that contradict an Advaita claim, then Advaita would have to revise its claim. But so far, that claim has not been contradicted by the tradition. So I believe that there should be great dialogue between physics, science, and Advaita. Those two traditions are very congenial for deep discussion. They can be partners in a deeper quest for understanding the nature of our universe. Unfortunately, among many who profess science, and this is only a hypothesis that they are material reductionists. They reduce reality only to what can be seen, heard, touched, felt, tasted. That is an unfounded claim. Even today, we know that the vast nature of reality is not available for sense perception. So to make a scientific, materialistic, reductionist argument is very unscientific. It's very unscientific. Not that I'm arguing against what you said. I think we are in agreement on that.
Many thanks. Now we can have another questions from the professor of our department, Dr. Bales Prasad sir. Yes, sir.
First of all, I would like to thank you, sir, for your elaborate lecture. Before I ask something from you, I would like to remember an event of 4 years before when I got referred by a professor of physics about your book, The Theology of Liberation, not two is not one. And in your today's lecture, which titles, What is Advait, the one and the many. So when we talk by taking these two, that is today's lecture and your book, I hope that is one magnum opus of your authorship. So when we see these two, we find that in both these elaboration, you have tried to very argumentatively justify the Advait by creating another world in addition to this world. That means I would like to say that the one universe in which we try to have the idea of ontology And by going through the notion that we can't prove in this world or this universe, that may be pushed into the world of another universe that can be taken as metaphysical one. So you have beautifully tried to harmonize these two worlds and justify the very conception Advaita. But the problem, when I go through your book, that is a Hindu theology of liberation, the not two is not one. And we see the address of the problem that is based on the ontology of social problems like patriarchy, homophobia, women issues, inclusion, exclusion, seclusion, and so many social problems. And you have once again very cleverly tried to resolve it by comparing or making an analogy that I can say that you have borrowed it from the Buddhist philosophy, that is the ideal of bodhisattva. And you have tried to hold this point that even after having liberation, one can resolve these problem, social issues, by taking birth after birth and birth after birth. And in this way, if it is in such a way, then why should not I say that you have borrowed this conception from Buddhism and tried to harmonize the inconsistency of this social ontology of Advaita philosophy? This is my question.
Thank you, Professor, first of all, for being here. I appreciate that you came to lecture, and thank you for a very strong question. Have I borrowed from Buddhism in reconstructing Advaita? First of all, I want to say that one of my arguments, a deep conviction that I hold, is that the highest teachings, if we regard the Upanishads as Advaitins do, regard the Upanishads as articulating and encapsulating the highest teachings of the tradition, it is my conviction that these teachings do not turn us away from life in the world, but enable us to live a richer and more meaningful existence in this world. That's my conviction, because I will struggle very much with a view that claimed that the highest teachings of the Hindu tradition are those teachings that turn us away from our fellow human beings and the challenges in life that they face. I hold that the highest teachings of the Hindu tradition bring me much closer to my fellow human beings and enables me to engage and relate to them with compassion, with love, with service. In the book that you mentioned, I'm grateful that you read my work. You're right. In the first part of the book, to which Professor so kindly referred, I sort of lay out the fundamentals of Advaita. And then in the second half, I apply these teachings to a number of contemporary problems, issues. So one of them is homophobia. So that's as you know, there is a great debate going on in our world about gender, transgender, and people who have gender identities that are not the traditional binaries, the traditional male-female binaries, come under a lot of They experience violence in many, many forms. Because of social rejection and because of social norms that suggest that gender is only binary. But Professor, I give that only as an example. I look back now and ask myself, how would I respond to that debate? Where would I stand as someone who coming from the Advaita tradition, or more broadly the Hindu tradition? And in all of those arguments, I have drawn from indigenous Hindu sources. So in my theology that argues against homophobia, I draw from the ancient Hindu teaching of Tritiya Prakriti, showing that there was a more complex understanding of gender in ancient India. On the issue of anthropocentrism, which sort of privileges human beings in our world and has led to the exploitation, the arguments that, the resources of the world are meant only for us and that the world can be recklessly explored. I have drawn again from the deep wisdom of the Upanishads to show that, there is much more, that we are part of this world, and that when we hurt nature, we're also hurting ourselves because we can't separate. I was very concerned as I wrote that book precisely about this. That's why your argument is so important to me. But I feel also, Professor, and I'm ready to admit, like all of you in this room, that I am indeed inspired by my learning from other traditions. And I see that as, I don't see anything wrong in a Hindu scholar learning from what his or her Buddhist scholars are, with the kinds of questions they are working with, things that they're struggling with. And now I bring back those questions to my own work in the Hindu tradition. So the work of other scholars who I incorporate, they act as a kind of a catalyst to me. They give me questions that I never asked. But I know that if my theology, Hindu theology of liberation, is uniquely Hindu, then I also have to ground it authentically, which is in Hindu sources. And I don't. When it comes to Buddhism, I regard Buddhism as very much of a tradition that belongs to India. The Buddha as a child of this land, as a child of this tradition, as a child of this culture. So many similarly, many people would also accuse me, and I'm being very honest with you, who disagree with my theology would say, he's not only, you raised the question of Buddhism, and many others say, Professor Rambachan's work is a Christianized form of Hinduism. But I ask, is compassion exclusive to Christianity? Do we not have in the Hindu tradition the ideal of daya, of karuna? I have not borrowed these things from Christianity. These are fundamental values of our own tradition. Para dukha dukha sukha sukha. Vaishnava janato tene kahi pira parai jani de. I don't have to look outside of the tradition for inspiration, for a life of compassion, for a life of justice, for a life of dignity, for all beings. They are rich indigenous wisdom in our tradition. But it is also true that sometimes our ability to see our tradition comes through the help of others. Others help us to see better what we have and what we may not have been seeing all along. That's the beauty of relationship. There's interreligious scholarly relationships that I value very, very much. I hope that I addressed your question. Thank you.
Now, thank you so much, sir. Now, one of our student, PG student, Francisco.
Hello, sir. Hello, everybody. You are discussing in your wonderful lecture about Advaita as non-monism. I'm very much interested in the idea of monism in Advaita Vedanta as well in Kashmiri Shaivism. And I was surprised about the idea of non-monism because yes, I understand the importance of the each individual and the importance of the world and the idea of non oneness and non multiple in the same time. But no, not we have this when we are saying about the idea of monism in Kashmiri Shaivism. We are explaining the importance of the world as the instrument of the oneness. So is it not the same idea with the idea of the monism when we are talking about the importance of individuals in Advaita Vedanta? This is my question.
Is it Francesca? Francesca. Thank you so much, Francesca, for coming, and thank you for your good question. Francesca, the reason why I, express my concern, for the list that I gave, dualism, pantheism, panentheism, I also included monism, because all of these words, all of these English terms have long histories of meaning for them. And so when scholars, Western scholars encountered the Advaita tradition and other Indian traditions, they sought now to sort of fit these into traditions and into language with which they were familiar. And therefore we have all of these terms used to describe Advaita, including monism. So I'm interrogating monism because I think that Advaita is saying something that monism does not really completely describe. Therefore, we must be hesitant. So certainly, monism historically, and in its own historical meaning, elevates the significance of the one. Elevates the significance of the one. It gives prominence to that one. But in a way, as you would admit, in a way that often diminish the significance of the many, privilege the significance of the one over the many. Of course, the many, has its origin in the one and so on. So I wanted to argue, Francesca, that not two is a unique mode of describing reality that gives significance both to the one and to the many. Both unto the one and to the many. Because we could argue for the one in a way that diminishes the many. And this is my argument against illusionism. Or you could argue for the many in a way that doesn't see the connectedness of the many through the one or in the one. So we need both. We need a way of understanding reality that honors. Pardon me? Ekam sat vipra bahuda vadanti. That's also the same idea. Exactly. And that's why that's where my criticism of monism is, because I think not two is not doesn't translate easily into monism. So Advaita, we must hold on to the richness of that unique relationship that it presents.
Thank you so much, sir. Now we can invite another questions. Jans.
This is even not a question. Thank you so much, Anantaji, for your presence among us. And I think in Varanasi, we like the Panditas who come by heart, quote so many slokas in Sanskrit. We give a lot of respect to them in Varanasi. You have invited us to recover, I don't know, the real Shankara, but to come back to the thought of Shankara beyond the commentators. It is often the fate of the genius to see their thought to be twisted by their followers. And I think there is a huge work, a critical work also which has already partially been done, which of those writings are from Shankara, which are from the successors, and to see that in a perspective, in an evolution of the assimilation of Shankara on his thought. Maybe the way to recover Shankara is to see Shankara, to understand Shankara through the testimony of those who have lived his own way, the Advaita way. And in India, we have not lacked many gurus who have so much embodied in their life the ideal of Shankara. I say that because when I was listening your conclusion as an echo to the first question you had, I was thinking, yeah, Anantanand, where it goes now. I mean, in this ideal of the Jivan Mukti, who can rejoice with those who rejoice and suffer with those who suffer. Definitely, you were not describing the ideal of a sannyasi who would have cut from the world and doesn't want to have any relationship with the world. Maybe you were, I was thinking, maybe he's describing the ideal of a bodhisattva. And it is true that people can say, oh, Anantanand is a Prachana Christian because he's mingling so much with Christians, so he's influenced now. But suddenly, came as a flash in my mind the Daya Sagar, the Karuna Sagar, and came to my mind three saints. Two of them were sannyasi of the 20th century, who have embodied so much the ideal of Shankara. Ramana Maharishi, people say, is one of the best illustration of the Advaita Vedanta in the 20th century. And when we look carefully the testimony of the life of Ramana in his ashram, it was so simple, so mingling with everybody, witness of the one, but rejoicing with those who rejoice, feeling sorrow with those who are suffering. So first, Ramana. Second, near Tiruvannamalai, we had Kanchipuram. And in Kanchipuram, after the Mahaswami, Swami Shankarendra Saraswati, who has lived almost 100 years, came Swami Jayendra, his own disciple. And Jayendra started his own way, a lot of commitment in social work and social justice. Some people were criticizing how he should just explain, the Upanishads. And yeah, he was a witness. And the third, and you have known him, who came to my mind, who was a sannyasi, Swami Chidananda of Divine Life Society. Some people were saying he was a Saint Francis of Rishikesh for his care for the lepers. And he has shown us he was a real Vedantin. Nobody can question that. But he has shown an ethical way to live that. So it's not a question, it's just a kind of reaction from your conclusion.
I appreciate your comment, Jan. You mentioned the Jivan Mukta. So just think of this. Shankara, in his understanding of the Jivan Mukta, he saw the possibility of the liberated person being active in the world. But he said that he limited the activity of the Jivan Mukta to teaching. The Jivan Mukta becomes the teacher. But do we need to limit the activity of a Jivan Mukta to the role of teaching? A Jivan Mukta could be a social activist. A Jivan Mukta can be concerned with environmental activism, doesn't have to limit. Once you admit that it is possible for Jivan Mukta to act in the world, then why not can we creatively expand the arena of that action? Let me just make one other point. I would be very disturbed, profoundly disturbed, painfully disturbed, if as an Advaitin, I would say that my heart bleeds for every child who is the victim of war in this world. For every child who goes to bed without a meal or doesn't have a place of shelter. And someone comes and tells me from an Advaita tradition, there is no other. What are you worried about? There's only one. There is no other. Someone could try to make an Advaita argument is that There is no suffering in the world. You only seen suffering because you are false Advaitin. If you were true Advaitin, you would not see anything other than the one. I would consider that to be a travesty of everything that Advaita stands for. Because if Advaita doesn't open one's heart in compassion, it is not doing what it's supposed to do. If the fruit of Advaita is not compassion, daya, karuna. After all, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says the highest yogi, Uttama yogi, is the one who embraces the suffering of another as his or her suffering. And that it is not simply an emotional feeling. Then you ask, what does one do? When the suffering of the other becomes your suffering, what do you do about it? What do you do to overcome it? That's the next logical question that follows.
Thank you so much, sir. Now we have another questions from online side. My friend Pujarini Das, who is working as an assistant professor at the University, Pakrimon University, Odisha. Yes, Pujarini, continue.
Thank you, sir, for such a intriguing debate on Advaita Vedanta. I have just a clarification about the Shankaracharya statement that Brahma Satya and Jagat Mithya. I just want to know why the idea of world is unreal. Because when you're talking about Atman and Brahman, both are physical, that means Atman is also real. For surviving the existential standpoint for an Atman, we need a space. And what we call that is the world or the Jagat. If Jagat would be unreal, then how could you establish your approach on that one manyness? Because for the manyness, we need a real world. So could you please clarify the point? Thank you.
Will please repeat briefly?
My question is that if Atman and Brahman both are identical, Brahmasmi, then the idea of Jagat or the world is mithya. How could we establish? Because for surviving the existential approach of Atman, we need a space. That means the real world. So why has highlighted that Brahman is real and Jagat is not? The question is how we can establish.
Put your question in the chat box. No.
Hello.
Yes. Pujarini Das. So please put your question in the chat box,
Can you
please.
hear my?
Just type.
Okay, but it will take some time. Can you hear me now?
Question in the chat box. We are proceeding. Yes. Now the scholar of this department, Matt, is going to ask.
When I got the message that you were coming to our department to present, I was so excited. I sent so many messages to our HOD. So thank you very much for coming. The first thing I just wanted to say is to express my appreciation. I'm researching Shankaracharya, and you've had a deeply profound impact on I think, the way I read Shankaracharya. In the very beginning, I was looking at Shruti and Anubhav, and I found your book, and this is the topic of my research. And then I realized it's already been done. So what do I do now? But that's, but I think that leads me to the second thing I wanted to say is your work to listen clearly again to the voice of Shankaracharya, and then to also listen clearly to his voice for the contemporary world is profound. And I think we all need to, especially I'm speaking more to research scholars and future teachers, I think you have to read his book, especially Accomplishing the Accomplished. I think its profundity has not quite trickled down into all the introductions of Indian philosophy classes. So please read that. That's an encouragement to us. Thirdly is the question, and I think the two of the professors hit on this, but I'm going to phrase it differently. As being one who unearths and tries to hear Shankaracharya's voice more clearly, do you think in conversation with him today, if he was looking at what you're doing creatively and Advaita, what do you think he would say? How do you think he would react to what you're trying to accomplish, especially in that creative aspect when it comes to ethics? That's been my big question as I've read your writings, is like everything else seems very tight with his original presuppositions and but in the same sense, there's a dialogue that happens, and we might go places where the original people did not quite see, but what do you think he would say to you as you continue to develop creatively at Advaita?
Thank you so much, Mark. And first of all, thank you so much for your generous words about my work and my writings. I appreciate all that you said. What would Shankara say about what I am doing? Mark, in the piece that I mentioned a little while ago that I wrote about Tulsidas, which was a critical piece, but also an appreciative piece of what he did, I said, look, I tried to answer this question in that essay: what would Tulsidas say about what I wrote? And I went back to the way in which he opened his magnum opus, Ramcharitmanas, where he says, that I am trying to describe the divine, but I am dull-witted, and the divine exceeds everything that I could say. So he asks, it's a kind of opening of deep humility about his limits. And I said, I'm hoping that Tulsidas would. We shouldn't worry about what he would say if we criticize him, because he was a man of deep humility. I can only say, Mark, what I hope Shankara would say, but I would hope that he would say that the Advaita tradition is such a rich tradition, and a tradition of such immense possibilities, Mark, that diving deep into this tradition and diving deep into the wisdom of the Upanishads, to find insights and to find resources that speak meaningfully to the challenges of our times, is fully consistent with what I have done. That I spoke to the challenges of my times, he would say, and I engaged the Purvamimamsakas because they were the ones who were challenging the centrality of the Upanishads as a pramana. But so we have to ask ourselves then, who are the who are the significant interlocutors for Advaita today? And what are the challenges to which Advaita should be speaking? And I would hope that the great Acharya would see that that is entirely consistent with the tradition, the flourishing of which he gave his life to. And because I do think, Mark, that unless this tradition speaks meaningfully to the conditions of life in this world, by being faithful to itself, unless it speaks meaningfully to the challenges of life in this world, it will not endure. It will lose its relevance. It will lose its reason for being. And I hope that Shankara would affirm that. But I can only speculate. Maybe he will not. And he will say that, well, this professor is not a sannyasi, and he should not be speaking about Advaita, but I would hope not. After all, so many of the teachers of the great teachers of the Upanishads were not renunciants. Yajnavalkya, Maitri, Shvetaketu, Haruni. We often forget that the Upanishads has conversations between husbands and wives and fathers and children. Therefore, they already there they were seeing the relevance of this wisdom to immersion in life in the world. It's a beautiful thought. Thank you.
Sir, we have just 3 teeny questions now. Yes, sir. Sir, just 3 questions are there, very teeny. So my friend Pujarini asked that if the Atman is real and the world is unreal, then how can we establish the idea of manyness in your presentation? Yes, sir. If the Atman is real and the world is unreal, then how can we establish the idea of manyness?
You know, again, it's a thank you for the.
Pujarini.
Oh, this is really interesting question, an important question. So even as I am interrogating the language here so much, so I'm going to ask, what is the word that we are translating? What is the Sanskrit word we are translating as unreal? Right. Is it mithya? No, mithya is not unreality. So it's really significant that again, you know, we use the words that the word is unreal. Where does that word unreal come from? What is its indigenous root and its indigenous location? So we have the famous, you know, line attributed to Shankara. We don't know. It's, you know, Brahma Satyam Jagan Mithya Jivo Brahmaiva Napara. The word here the word Jagat, the Sanskrit word used here is Mithya. What is it? What is the translation for Mithya? It's not unreal. Mithya, we call something Mithya when it is an, I would say, when it is an effect. Right? Mithya means it describes an object that is an effect of something else. So Brahman is cause, world is an effect. Therefore, as effect, world is Mithya. We call something Mithya when it has a ontologically dependent existence. Right? So the world does not exist independently of its cause. It has a dependent existence that is Mithya. So that which is an effect, that which is dependent, are 2 characteristics of that which is Mithya. But it is not unreal. It has a dependent existence. It is grounded in a deeper reality. So I would be very careful to translate Mithya as that which is unreal and speak of it much more as dependent existence. The world has no existence apart from its source, apart from the one Brahman. Francesca, you want to add something?
Much the idea of unreal, but the idea of Maya, which never points the idea of unreality, as the idea of something else
Okay, no, thanks. Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir. Now we have one other scholar, Vijayalakshmi Rai, is going to ask.
My pranam to all of you. Sir, I have a very basic question. Uh, like you said in your lecture that there is a difference between material cause, material cause and material ground. You said Brahman is material ground, not a material cause. Then if Brahman is, if we will accept Brahman as material cause, then the case will be like one transform himself in many, and the case will be similar to pantheism. Then here, till now, I was understanding or I was taking Brahman as material cause. So here I want to know only that what is the material cause if Brahman is not?
Thank you so much for your question. A very good question. And so we have the two again. Here's where we're running into these problems of language and translation. So in Sanskrit, we have nimitta karana and upadana karana. Now, how do we translate? Nimitta karana is translated in different ways. You find some translations, intelligent cause. Brahman is the one who, bahusyam praja, may I become many. The intelligence behind the many. There's less controversy there about translation of nimitta. Some say it's operative cause in English. Upadana. So I paused in my lecture. You quite rightly discern that. I said no, not material effect, but material ground. And why I said not material material cause. I said not material cause because it then gives the suggestion that somehow Brahman becomes transformed and we get exactly the problem that we land in, which you quite rightly noted. So, but there is still, what is fundamental here is that there is no other cause for the world but Brahman. Brahman doesn't create out of any other material. So there's no ontologically existing material from which Brahman could create. And that's what I said in relation to Yan. The Christian tradition has gone to say creatio ex nihilo, creation out of nothing. So in a sense, the problem there is that you make nothing into something. If you say creation out of nothing, then nothing becomes something out of which you create. So in saying that Brahman is both upadana karana and nimitta karana, we are making one point in Advaita, that there is no other cause but the one. There's no other material cause. Shankara is arguing, against Sankhya, Prakriti. The Prakriti argument he's opposing because it seems to attribute the origin of the world to something other than this primeval matter, other than Brahman. But I think what we need to hold is simply one cause, one unified cause that is not the material cause as such, but perhaps material ground, or maybe as a young scholar you come up with a better way of describing this one being who's the origin of everything. Does that help? In pantheism and Advaita, there is a single cause, but pantheism leans to speaking of the transformation of that one into the many, literal transformation of the one into the many. It's more, pantheism is quite closer, if you think of Indian philosophical traditions, quite closer to Parinamavada, where the one actually becomes transformed into the many. But Advaita is not. He rejects also Parinamavada and goes for Satkaryavada. So that would be, yeah, Pantheism is Parinama. I think that helps.
Thank you so much, sir. Now the last question, not the least. Now we have another scholar of this department, Meej.
Okay, thank you very much. We have only 5 minutes, and I'm already given to ask only one question. So, sir, thank you very much. And going through your deliberations, what I found is the last question was very fascinating. That a new way of being that you said, and I would like to ask, what is the foundation you are laying for this? A new way of being. In all your lecture, you mentioned about one and many. One, I suppose you mentioned to Brahman, and many, you gave many explanations on that. So, what is the thrust? It is on one or many. If you say many, then world also comes on many. And just now you refer Brahman, Satya, Jagat, Mithya, all other. So, are we, or are you trying to relate this one and many through this, a new way of being? But if you give importance to world, then I think maybe you are deviating from Shankara's philosophy as well. Just comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it's a fine question to finish our discussion today. I'm certainly not giving independent, exclusive value to the many. Because if I did that, as you quite rightly said, I would be violating something that is integral to Advaita. But I think that what I am also doing is not understanding the one and the relationship between the one and the many in a way that dismisses the many and doesn't give significance to the many. So I speak of the one and the many. In the Bhagavad Gita, where you ask, where am I getting, where is this coming from in some ways? Some of you might remember in the 18th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna speaks about 3 ways of knowing the world. And in one way of knowing, the person sees only the many. Sees only the many. In another way of seeing, the person doesn't only see the many, but sees only one thing among the many and considers that to be all important. But the way of seeing that the Gita comments is seeing the one and the many in their relatedness. In their relatedness. To see the one in the many. To see the one in the many. And why that is significant for me is that because in Advaita, that one is my own self. That one is my own self. And so I cannot but see Advaita scene is a scene that requires me to see myself in you. I don't know any other way of seeing but seeing myself in you. When I see you, I have to also recognize you in your distinctive uniqueness, because you are a unique being like everyone else. But at the same time, I have to see myself in you. And the outcome of seeing myself in you is that fundamental ethic that I have to grow to. It's a journey that when your pain becomes my pain, when your joy becomes my joy, when I can identify with you in your joy and your suffering. So it is an interesting, that's why it's not true. It's an interesting way of seeing the world. But you have to see both the one and the many in their relatedness. But not in an exclusive way that where only the one is seen or only the many are seen, but in their connectedness.
Thank you so much, sir, for your scholarly paper and scholarly interaction and your power of patience, which produces and reproduces many things. We learn a lot. We can imply in our knowledge to growth of our knowledge. Now, I would like to request Assistant Professor of this department, Dr. Kalpana Yadav, for the formal vote of thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Rajibu, for giving me this opportunity on the behalf of the department. I am Kalpana Yadav, Assistant Professor in the Department of Philosophy and Religion, Banaras Hindu University. So first of all, I express my deep thanks to speaker of this Chookolingo lecture series, Sir Professor Anantanand Rambachan, sir. And we can see that lucid interpretation regarding the philosophy, the Advaita, the one and many, was presented in a very consistent manner. So thank you so much for your lucid interpretation, luminous talk, sir. Thank you so much. Next, I would like to thank Head of the Department, Sir Professor Anand Mishra, for his guidance and for his commendable academic activity. Thank you so much. Next, I express my deep thanks to faculty members from our department and other universities. So, first of all, I would like to name some of professors here, such as Professor D.B. Chaube sir, Professor S.C. Dubey sir, Dr. Pramod Kumar Bagre sir, Dr. Grace ma'am, and Dr. Niti, Dr. Rahul, Dr. Priyanka, Dr. Balishwar Yadav sir, H.S. Prasad sir, Uma Chattopadhyay ma'am, Alok Tandon sir, and I express my deep thanks to all of you. Next, I express my deep thanks to my dear students and research scholars for their active participation. And at last, very thank you so much to convener of this Chookolingo lecture series, who has convened this lecture series in a very consistent manner, in a very good manner, well-mannered. Okay, thank you so much to Dr. Rajibo. And now, thank you so much to all of you for joining us today. Thank you all. Over to Dr. Rajibu.
Thank you, one and all.